This time it's 5 race rep superbikes from the 1990s. In the 80s many companies had built superbikes, but a lot of them had looked rather frumpy and kind of sports tourish with that jelly mould styling. By the 90s however, things had moved on considerably and an awful lot of the companies were now producing full-on race replica superbikes. Here are 5 of the most popular. The Honda CBR 900RR Fireblade. With its compact dimensions, which were much more like those of a 600 Supersport than a full-on sport bike, the Fireblade really caused a major stir, particularly those small 16-inch wheels when it first appeared in 1992. The original Fireblade used an 893cc engine, with the usual inline-4 layout, rather than the V4 which Honda of course had spent a lot of time developing during the 80s. The concept had originally begun as a 750, but the engineers increased the stroke to raise capacity out to 893cc's. The bike used an all-aluminium frame and weighed in at just 185 kilos, with a wheelbase of just 1.405 metres. All in, the bike weighed just 4 pounds or 1.8 kilos more than a CBR 600 F2, while the then top dog FZR 1000 was 34 kilos or 76 pounds heavier. In '94 the bike was given an all-new gear shift mechanism which much improved the rather notchiness of the original gear change. '95 would see that fox eye styling which replaced the raw and aggressive look of the original twin headlamp model. And '96 would see a revised suspension and chassis setup, some restyling and an increase of capacity to 919cc's. The bike would then see only minor changes right until the end of the millennium, when there would be an all-new model with a 929cc fuel injection engine on a totally revised chassis, effectively a ground-up redesign. The Yamaha FZR 1000. The FZRs were available as either 600 or 1000cc. The 1000 had been a development of the much earlier FZ 750. Like the FZ, it had those 4 cylinders that were steeply inclined and 5 valves per cylinder. But unlike the 750, it did not use a perimeter aluminium frame. Instead it used what was called a delta box frame, which is essentially aluminium castings that were welded together to form a very solid spine for the bike. The first model was a 989cc crosser frame 4-cylinder engine, with the cylinders inclined at 45 degrees. The second generation bikes had an increased capacity to 1002ccs. Also the cylinder block had a reduced inclination angle of 35 degrees. And the bike also features the unique X-up power valve system. This had a servo-driven motor in the valve. This modulated effectively the bore of the exhaust system, which would affect the gas flow speeds at various engine speeds, giving the motor unparalleled flexibility for its class. So effective was the system that would remain in use in the Thunder Ace as well as early models of the R1. 1989 would also see a major redesign of the engine, which would reduce the wheelbase and allow for more compact chassis. And there was of course a major redesign of the bodywork, with a new single letterbox style headlamp replacing the old dual set. In '91 there would be upside down forks for the first time, and then in '94 there would be the final version of the X-Up, now with a new fox eye design which was very much the corporate standard of the time. '95 would be the final year of FZR production. After that it was the Thunder Ace Sports Tourer or the all new razor edged R1 model. But that's probably a story for another video. Kawasaki Z XR 750. Like Honda, Kawasaki's sports bike range of the period tended to encompass sports tourers, in this case the ZZR 600 and ZZR 1100 models. But for the all-important superbike class, they had the ZXR 750, also called the ZX7 or ZX7 if you prefer, in other markets. The machine was introduced way back in 1989 and would stay in production all the way until 2003, with fairly minor changes, most of which were cosmetic, during its entire long production run. The ZX used an inline 4-cylinder 4-stroke motor, so fairly typical for the class. The machine also featured a CAD-designed twin-spar aluminium chassis. Cosmetically, the bike had the by then fairly standard twin round headlamps at the front, although these would later be replaced by fox eye designs. Although on some models, without a doubt the most notable feature was those ram air tubes, which ran from the back of the fairing and into the fuel tank, looking for all the world like you've stolen 2 hoses off your mum's Hoover and shoved them onto your bike to look cool. And the bike would be a championship winner in both the AMA World Superbike and World Endurance Championships. The engine ran very over-square dimensions of 73 by 44.7 and had a high compression ratio of 11.5 to 1. Peak power was measured up between 104 and 109 horsepower at the rear wheel, and top speed was in the 150 to 160 mph plus bracket. The ZXR range would prove extremely popular, and in Japan there was a 250 and 400cc versions also available, with the 400cc version even being officially imported to the UK for a while. But with the move to the litre class and Superbikes, the bike was finally phased out in 2003, one of the last survivors of the 750 class, with only the GSXR 750 outliving it. Suzuki's GSXR 750. The GSXR, affectionately known as the Gixxer, was the model that replaced the Katana at the top of Suzuki's sport bike range. The bike is often said to be the first Japanese race replica, although it's not actually true because the 400 came out a few months before. The Gixxer was available as a 600 in some markets, a 750 and of course the 1100 Monster. But we're going to focus on the 750 here because it's the bike that really sold the best in Britain, being the one eligible for Superbike racing, and it's probably the most sensible. Well, sort of. It's the least insane, let's put it this way. But the bike was very much an evolution of the previous generation, particularly in terms of its engine. This was a 749cc 4-stroke liquid cooled unit, it's true, but it actually used oil cooling as it was an evolution of the earlier air-cooled motors. It did have 4 valves per cylinder though, and dual overhead cams of course. The original and now very trendy slab-side models were gradually replaced by increasingly more curvy updates, and the engine was given an increasingly short stroke, of course in the search for higher RPM and therefore power. Although interestingly, Suzuki returned to the longer stroke motor for some homologation specials, and also from the 1991 onwards standard production models. These would also feature fairly substantial top end changes and ever more elaborate radiators to cool the oil. However, 1992 would see the WN. This would be the first truly water-cooled engine, and would greatly simplify the cooling system, with Suzuki's engine now effectively falling into line with the rest of the opposition. Well, except for the US market of course, where the 600 sleeve down model would have the water-cooled engine, but the 750 would have to wait for yet another year. And these models would continue with fairly minor changes up until 1996 and the arrival of the SRAD models. Now the SRAD model is a completely different machine, totally new engine, revised, more conventional perimeter frame and very different styling. It's a more powerful and more capable machine than the original models, but for me it just lacks the style. The Ducati 916 family. The Ducati 916 and its smaller brother the 748 are of course evolutions of the earlier 851 and 888 families, and indeed under the skin the machine has a lot of similarities with the earlier model. There are some fairly obvious cosmetic and design changes. There's a single-sided swinging arm and of course that truly gorgeous bodywork. And while the previous model was pretty, the 916 is perhaps one of the most beautiful motorcycles ever created, although of course opinions do differ. The machine of course uses the Desmo Quattro engine developed by Fabio Taglioni, and was an evolution of the earlier air-cooled Panther and later SS models. The engine was developed by designer Massimo Tamburini, and although similar to the 888, incorporated larger valves, bigger capacity and a totally revised engine management system. The increase in displacement is achieved by lengthening the stroke from 64 to 66 mm, resulting in 916 cc's. The trellis frame, although in some ways similar to that of the earlier models, was lighter and more compact, and this and that beautiful sleek bodywork means that the 916 overall looks quite a bit smaller than the previous models, which of course it is. It has been suggested that some of the elements of the Ducati styling were influenced by Honda's NR750. This may be true, but the Ducati is much more beautiful, it's much sleeker and much more compact, and aesthetically it just works so much better than the rather frumpy looking NR. The bike was so different to the 888 that initially Ducati struggled to get it set up for racing, but eventually it would become probably Ducati's greatest world superbike racer, and a true design icon of the 1990s. What collections of bikes would you like to see us do a video on? Maybe you've got a bike we can use for a test ride. Either way, get in touch below. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.